People of faith who see in the scriptures the word of God would like to imagine that we have no questions about which books should be in our Bibles because Jesus himself settles the question by quoting from the book of Genesis, the first book of the Bible, and supposedly quoting from the last book in the Hebrew Bible. But this isn't a convincing argument. Hi, my name is Michael Barber. I'm professor of biblical studies and theology. I teach here at the Augustine Institute Graduate School. I'm making this video from my office here on campus. And the idea that Jesus settles the question of which books belong in the Bible and how those books should be arranged is hardly convincing. First, the claim is based on a saying that's found in the Gospel of Matthew. Jesus says, I send you prophets and wise men and scribes. Some of them you will kill and crucify, and some of them you will flog in your synagogues and pursue from city to city, so that upon you may come all the righteous blood poured out upon the earth, from the blood of Abel the righteous to the blood of Zechariah, the son of Barachiah, whom you murdered between the temple and the altar. Now, it's assumed that Jesus is here referring to the death of Zechariah, the son of Jehoiada, a story that we find in Second Chronicles. This is a different person than the prophet Zechariah, who has a book named after him in the Bible. We read in the first verse of the book of Zechariah, in the 8th month, in the 2nd year of Darius, the word of the Lord came to the prophet Zechariah, son of Berechiah, son of Iddo. That's Zechariah 1:1. Notice that this man is not the son of Jehoiada the priest. Now, Catherine Sider Hamilton points out in her excellent book, The Death of Jesus in Matthew, that these two figures, these two Zechariahs, are conflated. They come to be conflated in later Jewish tradition. And it's entirely possible that Matthew is an early witness of this interpretive tradition, which we see in, for example, the Lamentations Rabbah, rabbinic commentary in the book of Lamentations. But this still isn't for certain, okay? The earliest Christian commentator on this verse, Origen, thought that this was a reference to the death of Zechariah, John the Baptist's father. Origen says, but those who were reproached by Christ could not have killed Zechariah, son of Berechiah. Jesus says, you killed him, right? But he says, it can't be him, one of the 12 prophets, whose writings we have in hand, but he means Zechariah, father of John the Baptist. Now, in his excellent study on the development of the Biblical Canon, it's called The Formation of the Biblical Canon. It's 2 volumes. Lee Marvin McDonald points out that Jerome would later disagree with Origen on this. And he says that Jesus is referring to the figure in 2 Chronicles 24. But here's the thing. Jerome didn't put Chronicles at the end of the last section of the Bible, the Ketuvim. And this is surprising because he generally follows what comes to be the Jewish Bible, the Tanakh. But the bigger problem is this. The notion that 2 Chronicles closes the Hebrew Bible, it's the last book of the Hebrew Bible. This is found nowhere until the Babylonian Talmud tractate, Bava Batra. And where we do have collections of biblical books, 1st and 2nd Chronicles is not placed as the last part of that final section of the Hebrew Bible, the Tanakh. So our 2 most important witnesses of the Hebrew text, and it's not scrolls, but codexes, they're like, bound together like books. In those, Chronicles appears first in the last section of the Bible, the writings. So we can't imagine that Jesus is quoting something like the first book, because he quotes a story from Genesis, and then the last book, and then he's saying, okay, this is the complete Hebrew Bible. Of course, Jesus doesn't clarify which books come in between there. So we just can't know, and it's really irresponsible to claim that in Jesus's day, there was a clear understanding that 2 Chronicles closes out the Hebrew canon. So we're going to see that there were debates about which books belong in the Bible all the way up until the Babylonian Talmud, which is written in the 5th century. So it's not like this was a settled question in Jesus's day. More to come. Make sure you follow, subscribe, make sure you don't miss more content from this channel. I'd love to hear your thoughts on all this in the comment box. Thank you so much for watching.